Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Nedarim. We are up to Perek Bet Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel ben Chana bad Miriam, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim L'Chaim v'Derifua Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shah Cholei Israel. The Mishnah discusses another area in which Nedarim are treated more stringently than Shavuot. Yesh neder betoch neder. There is a situation where a neder takes effect within the term of another neder. Then shvuah betoch shvuah, but there is no situation where a shvuah takes effect within the term of another shvuah. Ketzad, how so? Amar areini naziri mochal, areini naziri mochal va'achal. If someone said, I shall be a nazir, which is a form of neder, if I eat this loaf of bread, and he said it again, I shall be a nazir if I eat this same loaf, and then he ate the loaf, chayav al kol achat ve'echat, he is obligated to be a nazir twice, once for each neder he made. The second neder of nazirut took effect immediately after the first one, but could not be observed in practice until the first period of nazirut ended. He is a nazir for 30 days, as is the law where no particular period is specified. He brings the appropriate offerings, and then he immediately becomes a nazir again for 30 days on account of the second neder. Even though the two periods of Nizirut are observed one after the other, the Mishnah says a neder within a neder because the obligation to observe the second period of Nizirut took effect at the beginning of the first period of Nizirut. Only the fulfillment of the obligation had to be delayed. Now, this law applies only to a neder of Nizirut and not to any other type of neder. For example, if someone says twice, this loaf is forbidden to me, it is prohibited with only one neder. Shvuah shelo ochal v'achal. However, if a person said, I take a shvuah that I will not eat this loaf, and he said it again, I take a shvuah that I will not eat the same loaf, and he ate the loaf, and he is liable to be punished for breaking only one shvuah. He receives only one set of malkut because the second shvuah cannot take effect after the same shvuah has already been made. Instead of saying there is only one shvuah, the Mishnah says he is liable for only one shvuah. This implies that even the second shvuah exists at some level. If the first shvuah is annulled, the Rav explains the second takes effect. And that is in a Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Dal deals with cases where someone made a neder that can be understood in two different ways. According to one meaning, the neder is valid, but according to the other meaning, it is invalid. At the time he made the neder, he did not say which meaning he intended. Setam nedarim lachmir, unclear nedarim that have two meanings, the one that is effective and one that is not, are treated stringently, meaning we assume that he intended the effective meaning and the neder is valid. We assume that he intended the effective meaning because otherwise he would have not bothered to make the neder. This ruling would apply where, for example, the person does not remember what he intended when he made the neder. Uperusham la'akel, however, their explanation is accepted even if it is lenient, meaning if the person said then or later that he intended the lenient meaning, his word is accepted and the neder is void. The Mishnah gives an example. Ketzad, what is an example of an unclear neder? Amar re'alai kebasar meliach ki yain nesech. Someone said this loaf of bread is like salted meat, or like wine libation to me. Salted meat could mean a sacred offering because salt must be applied to every offering as stated in Seder Vayikra, chapter 2, verse 13. On the other hand, it could refer to an offering to an idol because it was the practice of idolaters to salt their offerings. Similarly, libation wine could refer either to the wine that is poured on the altar in the temple when Olah and Shlamim offerings are brought, or to wine that idolaters pour before their idols. Im shel shamayim nadar asur. If he explained that he vowed referring to the meat and wine offered to heaven, the loaf is prohibited because such meat and wine are forbidden by a person's declaration, because we have learned that when a person makes a neder by linking the object of the neder to another forbidden object, the neder is valid only if the second object was forbidden by a person's declaration rather than being forbidden in its own right. Im shel avodah zarah nadar mutar. But if he explained that he vowed referring to meat and wine offered to idols, the loaf is permitted because this meat and wine are forbidden by the Torah without a person's declaration. Vim satam asur, and if he left the neder unclear and never explained what he meant, the loaf is prohibited because the neder is interpreted stringently as referring to meat and wine offered to heaven. Another example, like cherem. Someone said this loaf is like a cherem to me. Now, if a person says that something he owns is cherem, it becomes either a gift to the temple or a gift to the Kohanim, depending on his intent. If it is a gift to the temple, it is forbidden as hektish, like all temple property. If it is a gift to the Kohanim, it is hektish only until a Kohen receives it, at which point it loses its sanctity and becomes permitted. Im kicherem shel shamayim asur. If he explained that he was referring to a cherem to heaven, meaning a gift to the temple, the loaf is prohibited because such a cherem is forbidden by a person's declaration. Vim kicherem shel kohanim mutar. But if he explained that he was referring to a cherem for kohanim, a gift to the kohanim, the loaf is permitted because the cherem for kohanim is permitted once it reaches the kohen. Although a cherem for kohanim is forbidden before it is given to the kohen, when a person says the cherem of the kohanim, he is understood as referring to the object in the hands of the kohen when it is no longer forbidden. Vim setam asur, and if he left the neder unclear and never explained what he meant, the loaf is prohibited because the neder is interpreted stringently as referring to a cherem to heaven. A third example, someone said this loaf is like maaser to me. Im kemaaser be'ema nadar asur. If he explained that he vowed referring to maaser be'ema, the loaf is prohibited because maaser be'ema is forbidden by a person's declaration. Now, a person who owns cattle, sheep, or goats is biblically obligated to bring 1/10 of the animals born each year as offerings in the temple. We call maaser be'ema the animal tithe. He gathers all the newborn animals into a pen that has an opening wide enough for only one animal to pass through at a time. Counting the animals as they leave the pen, he marks every 10th one with red paint, saying this is maaser. By calling it maaser, he sanctifies it and makes it prohibited as an offering. Therefore, it is something that is forbidden by a person's declaration. V'im shel goren mutar. But if he explained that he was referring to the maaser of produce in a granary, meaning maaser rishon, the loaf is permitted because maaser rishon is permitted. Now, produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael is prohibited tevel until several portions are separated from it. The first portion that must be separated is terumah. A standard amount is 1/50th of the crop, which is given to a kohen. Terumah is sacred and may be eaten only by the kohanim and the members of their households. The next portion is maaser rishon, 1/10 of what remains, which must be given to a Levi. Maaser rishon does not have any sanctity according to most Tanaim, and it may be eaten by anyone. Two other portions called maaser are separated from produce, namely maaser sheni, the second tithe, which must be eaten in Yerushalayim, and maaser ani, the 10th of the poor, which must be given to the poor. However, the word maaser on its own refers to maaser rishon, the first 10th. Vim setam asur, and if he left the neder unclear and never explained what he meant, the loaf is prohibited because the neder is interpreted stringently as referring to maaser be'ema. A fourth example, harei alai ki truma, someone said this loaf is like teruma to me. Im ki trumat lishka nadar asur. If he explained that he vowed referring to the truma of the temple chamber, the coins designated for buying offerings, the loaf is prohibited because the truma of the temple chamber is forbidden by a person's declaration. When the temple stood, all men were required to give a half shekel coin each year to the temple. The coins were put in a certain room in the temple, and 3 times a year some were removed and used to buy communal offerings. The removed coins were known as the Terumat Alishka, literally the separation from the chamber. Each coin became sacred hekdesh when the owner declared it to be his half shekel donation. Vim shel goren, but if he explained that he was referring to the terumah of the produce in a granary, the loaf is permitted because terumah produce is forbidden by the Torah. Even though terumah is designated by a person, it is not considered something prohibited by a person's declaration because the entire crop, including the terumah that will eventually become the entire portion, because the entire crop, including the portion that will eventually become terumah, was prohibited before the designation. Therefore, the person's designation of a portion as terumah did not change the status from permitted to prohibited. This is in contrast to the coins designated as half shekel contributions and the animals designated as maaser be'ema, which were not prohibited before the designation. V'im setam asur, and if he left the neder unclear and never explained what he meant, the loaf is prohibited because the neder is interpreted stringently as referring to the terumah of the temple chamber. Div Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Sitam terumah biuda surah. If someone in Yehuda made an unclear reference to terumah, this loaf is like terumah to me. The loaf is prohibited for the reason that we explained. Bagalil muteret. However, if someone in the Galil made the same neder, the loaf is permitted. Shen anshe Galil makirin et terumat elishka, because the people of the Galil who live far from the temple which was located in Yehuda do not think about the terumah of the temple chamber. Therefore, when they mention terumah, they certainly mean the terumah of produce, which makes the neder invalid. The Tanakh, however, disagrees. In his opinion, even a person from Galil might mean the terumah of the temple chamber, and therefore this neder does take effect. The Rav does tell us the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah so far has been based on the premise that a neder with 2 meanings is interpreted stringently. The next Tana disagrees with that premise. The following is not a continuation of Rabbi Yehuda's statement, rather it is the view of Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. Setam charamim b'Yehuda mutarin. If someone in Yehuda made an unclear reference to charamim, this loaf is like a cherem. The loaf is permitted because like we learned, cherem could mean either a cherem to heaven, which would make the neder valid, or a cherem for the kohanim, which would make it invalid. Therefore, the neder does not take effect, because according to this Tana, an unclear neder is interpreted leniently. Ubagalil asurin, however, if someone in the Galil made the same neder, the loaf would be forbidden. Shen anshe Galil makrin et chermei kohanim, because the people of the Galil do not think about charamim for kohanim. People in Galil do not live among kohanim, for kohanim live mainly in Yehuda, near the temple. Therefore, in Galil, people from Galil say cherem, they do not mean a cherem for kohanim, rather they refer to a cherem to heaven, which makes the neder valid. Now, although this Tana holds that an unclear neder is interpreted leniently, he agrees in this case that the neder takes effect, since it certainly refers to a cherem to heaven, which being prohibited by a person's declaration is an effective reference in a neder. In Yehuda, both words cherem terumah are the same, and that both have two likely meanings, one that is effective and one that is ineffective. Therefore, though Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok stated this ruling in the context of cherem, he would also rule leniently regarding terumah. Likewise, Rabbi Yehuda stated his ruling with respect to terumah would rule stringently regarding cherem as well. The Mishnah therefore could have presented both opinions in reference to the same case. Instead, it cites each Tana in the context of how each one heard his ruling from his teacher. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.